All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Today's daf, incredible daf ahead of us. Today's daf is Lamed Vav. We are going to pick up on Lamed Hamid Beis 35b, and we are picking up in the wide lines 2, 4, 6, 7 lines into the wide lines. Esvei. Our shir this morning, we thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, Jerry and Abby Applebaum, for dedicating all the shiurim this month in memory of Basya Bas Chaim and David ben Avraham. Doctors Paul and Linda Weinberg for dedicating the shiurim this month in memory of their son, Mordechai Yehoshua ben Peretz Moshe Miriam. Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating the shiurim the zchus of refuah sheileimah for Kathy's sister, Donna Baker-Matson. Teri Czinn for dedicating the shiurim with gratitude to Hashem for their grandson, Bunim Tzvi Hersch Czinn. And Naftali Tilson for dedicating the shiurim with thanks to his chaver, Benjamin Wohl, and with wishes of a Chag Kasher V'Sameach to the entire shir. And Avraham Shaindy Kelman for dedicating the shiurim this month, commemoration of the yahrzeit of Avram's mother, Bernice Kelman, Sara Braina, Bas Yehoshua Heschel. We hope that in the merits of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah. The families in Nechama, all those who require a refuah, should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. So with that, let us begin. Today's daf, as I mentioned, Lamed Vav, we're picking up Lamed Hamid Beis, 7 lines down into the wide lines, Esvei. Just to regroup for a moment, we had a machlokes, Rabosai. The Mishnah introduced us to a fascinating case, which was what happens if one does chalitza or yibum with a Yevamos who is pregnant, right? So again, without going through the entire Mishnah again, this then led to a machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish in a very specific case, namely halacha l'maisa. We'll call them, right, Reuven and Shimon, 2 brothers. Reuven passes away. Rachel falls to Shimon. Shimon does chalitza with Rachel, but it turns out that Rachel's pregnant. Now, again, the additional twist in this is she miscarries. So now, we'll say, what's the sheileimah? Does he need to do chalitza again? Or did the chalitza that was done with pregnant Rachel, does that work? Rabbi Yochanan says, you don't have to do another chalitza. Reish Lakish says she requires another chalitza. So now we're just in the back and forths between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. So Eis Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan is the Kasher Reish Lakish. Ein havlad shal kayami kayim. The Mishnah said, right, in a case where the Yevamos gives birth, if she does not give birth to a viable baby, and the Yavam performed yibum while she was pregnant, Yikayim ultimately is permitted to keep her as a wife. Rabbi Yochanan says, according to me, this makes sense, that because I hold that chalitza on a pregnant woman works, and ultimately again, yibum on a pregnant woman works as well. That's why the Mishnah says, if she gives birth, and unfortunately the baby is not viable, halacha l'maisa, he's allowed to remain married to her. But according to you, who holds that halacha l'maisa, the chalitza of a pregnant woman is not a proper chalitza, and ultimately yibum with a pregnant woman is not yibum. So the Gemara, the Mishnah should say that after she gives birth and unfortunately the baby is not viable, he should have to repeat the process, either yibum or chalitza. Says Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan, what does it mean when the Mishnah says he can remain married to her? Ultimately, what it means is he can remain married to her if what? If he does yibum again. An alternate version of this. The Mishnah said if the baby doesn't survive, baby's not viable, and he did yibum with her while she was pregnant, he could remain married to her, to which the Gemara says, according to me, this makes sense. Reish Lakish says, that Reish Lakish says, I hold that chalitza or yibum with a pregnant woman doesn't work. Reish Lakish says, that's the Mishnah means. And the Mishnah means that after she miscarries, you could remain married to her. What it means is, if you want to remain married to her, you can go ahead and do yibum or chalitza again. But according to you, Rabbi Yochanan, ratza yotzi, ratza yikayim. It should say that halacha l'maisa again. Whether you want to go ahead and rely on the first yibum or chalitza. I did the Tana Reisha Yotzi, Tana Nami Seifa Yikayim. I will say ultimately again, so according to Rabbi Yochanan, we'll say it's true. Once the Reisha said Yotzi, ultimately again the Seifa said Yekayim as well. Fine. So we'll say, so again, bottom line, Rabbi Yochanan is trying to bring proofs against each other from the Mishnah, but neither has been successful so far. So therefore again, we're still holding by the machlokes. If you do chalitza with your Yevama who is pregnant and then she subsequently miscarries, does that chalitza work or not? Rabbi Yochanan says, halacha l'maisa, yes, and Reish Lakish says no. And by the way, the effect of saying no is what? After the miscarriage, what has to happen? He has to do chalitza again. Good. So says the Gemara, Meisvei, Hakone says Yivim Tovanim says Meuberes. If a person does yibum, and it turns out that the Yevam is pregnant, Hare zu lo tinasei tzarasa, Shema Yehe Vlad ben Kayama. We're switching gears for just a moment. So let's say again, Reuven and Shimon, and Reuven is married to Rachel and Leah. They're not sisters, they're not this, just co-wives. Right? So what happens? So now Shimon does chalitza, Shimon does yibum with Rachel. And it turns out that she's pregnant. Rachel's pregnant. So the Brisa says, Leah, the co-wife, should not do anything until when? Right? Until we find out what happens with the baby. Why? Shema Yehe Vlad ben Kayama. Because perhaps Rachel will give birth to a viable baby. But let's say, if Rachel gives birth to a viable baby, then what? What's Leah's status? She's fine, right? In other words, if it turns out that Rachel gives birth to a viable baby, then Rabbi say, then what? There's no mitzvah yibum. In which case, again, Leah is just a regular widow. Adarabba, ki avi Vlad ben Kayama miftarat sarasa. I don't understand. If that's the case, if the baby's going to be viable, so that's good for, Baruch Hashem is good for everyone, but it's good for Leah. Leah is then just a regular widow. Ela ema shema lo yehe Vlad ben Kayama. No. Rather, what we're concerned about is perhaps the baby will not be viable. If the baby's not viable, then what? Then the problem is over here that Shimon did yibum with a pregnant Yevama. So ultimately, Reish Lakish says, you see from here that what? That Allah yibum with a pregnant Yevama doesn't work. Otherwise, if it did work, the co-wife should be free to go about her business. Abai says like this. Bebia kuli ama lo pligi de lo patra ki pligi bechalitza. Ross is interesting. Abai wants to make an interesting distinction. Abai says everyone agrees that yibum with a pregnant Yevama does not work. Everyone agrees with that, right? And that again, halacha l'maisa, we're going to have to wait to see what happens with the baby. And then once again, the Yavam will have to figure out yibum or chalitza, but we'll have to do something again. Where's the machlokes? The machlokes, interestingly enough, is in chalitza. Rabbi Yochanan Savra chalitzas mu'ber shma chalitza, bias mu'ber lo shma bia. Reish Lakish Savra bias mu'ber lo shma bia, v'chalitza mu'ber lo shma chalitza. So we'll say this is really interesting. So Abai wants to make this distinction that halacha l'maisa everyone will agree that yibum with a pregnant Yevama is not going to work. What's the machlokes? The machlokes is chalitza with a pregnant Yevama. Rabbi Yochanan will say it works. Right? Ultimately, again, Reish Lakish will say it doesn't work. Amalei Rava says that's ridiculous. Manavshach. I bias mu'ber shmabia, chalitzas mu'ber shma chalitza. Vi bias mu'ber lo shmabia, chalitzas mu'ber snavi lo shmabia. The hakay malan, top of Lamed Vav, kala ola liyibum, ola lechalitza. V'chol she'ein ola liyibum, ein ola chalitza. Rava says that flies in the face of everything we've been learning. Which is, again, at the end of the day, if yibum with a pregnant woman works, then chalitza works. And ultimately, again, if yibum with a pregnant woman doesn't work, chalitza doesn't work. Why? Because Rabbi say our general principle is that what? Yibum and chalitza are what? Two sides of the same coin. So halacha l'maisa again, where one is going to be effective. Rabbi say. Now that being said, we've spent many times speaking about cases where we will say that yibum cannot be done, chalitza can be done. That's different. What the Gemara is just saying over here is, in cases where there is a chiyuv of yibum, if one is going to work, the other is going to work as well. There's no such thing as one working and not the other. Ela Amar Rava. Rava say, here we go. Rather, Rava comes along and he suggests as follows. Hachi kamar, hakonis yivim tovenim seis mu'uberes. So we'll say, here's the case. Right? Reuven and Shimon. Reuven is married to two wives, Rachel and Leah. They're unrelated to each other, right? So no sisters, no achos, none of that, right? Shimon, to keep it simple, is single. So Reuven passes away. Rachel and Leah fall to Yibum to Shimon, and now we'll say what happens. Shimon does Yibum with Rachel. And lo and behold, what does he find out? Rachel's pregnant. Not from him. Rachel's pregnant. So here's the case. If a person marries his Yevamo, and it turns out that she is pregnant, Harezu lo tinasei tsarasa. Leah, the co-wife, should not do anything just yet. Shema Yehevlad ben Kayama, ubias meuberes lo shma bia, v'chalitzas meuberes lo shma chalitza, v'havlad ino poter ad sheyetzei la'avir ha'olam. Okay, now we'll say this makes sense. So Rav says like this: in this case, where Reuven did Yibum with Rachel, and it turns out that Rachel was pregnant, what do we tell Leah? Wait, you have to wait. Why? Because Rav is saying, halacha l'maisa. What does everything hinge on? The baby. Because Rav is saying is like this: Yibum with a pregnant woman, with a pregnant sister-in-law, doesn't work. Chalitza does not work. And the only time that a baby will exempt the wives from Yibum is when that baby is born and determined to be a viable child. So essentially now that we found out that Rachel is pregnant, everything goes into a holding pattern, right? Because remember again, even though Shimon had relations with Rachel, that's not Yibum. Why Rava says? Because bias meuberes lav shma bia, or you write Yibum with a pregnant Yevama is not effective. So now the Yibum didn't work, but at the same time she may not even be subject to Yibum because she may be having a baby. But the only time the baby will exempt her from Yibum is when Rava says if it's a vlad shal kayama, a viable baby, which we'll only know once she gives birth. So essentially what Rav is saying is, if it turns out that the Yevama is pregnant, we tell the co-wife, wait. Leah, don't do anything. Wait till Rachel gives birth. Let's see what happens then. Again, and I will say here there are two possibilities. Possibility one is Baruch Hashem, baby's healthy. Baby's fine. What's the halacha then? Everyone's good to go. Right now, the truth is, again, Shimon and Rachel are going to have a problem because at the end of the day, they inadvertently committed an act of arayos, right, of Eishasach, but we'll leave that on the side for now. But Lamais, if she has a baby, everyone's good to go. They're widows, that's their status, they're almanos, they're good to go. If the baby Chas Hashem is not a Vlad Shal Kayama, then what? Then once again they're subject to Yibum / Chalitza, but they'll have to repeat the process because Yibum Chalitza done during pregnancy does not work. Beautiful. So Tanya Kavasi di Rava. But see a right that supports Rava. If a person does Yibum with his Yevama, and it turns out that she's pregnant, Hare zu lotina se tzarasa, so the co-wife should not remarry. Shema Yehevlad ben Kayama, vein bia v'chalitza poteres, ela vlad poter, v'avlad in potra, ela ad sheyetze la'avira olam. So we'll say pretty much restated that which we just said. So again, when Shimon does Yibum with Rachel, and it turns out that Rachel is pregnant, we tell Leah, don't do anything, because let's see what unfolds. Because here's what we know. The Yibum that Shimon did with Rachel, ineffective. Why is it ineffective? She's pregnant. And halacha l'maisa again, so Yibum with a pregnant doesn't work. That's Aleph. We also don't know about the baby, right? And the only time the baby will impact the Yibum status is when the baby is born. So we tell the co-wife, sit tight until again Rachel b'shat tov maslachas gives birth, and then we'll figure out what's happening over here. Taimo the Shemei Vlad ben Kayama. So the reason we're concerned, or the issue is, perhaps the baby will be viable. Ha lo havi Vlad ben Kayama miftar tsarasa. But I will say, if the baby is not viable, ultimately it sounds like Leah is free to go. So leime tehevit yufta Reish Lakish. I will say, does this not refute Reish Lakish? Because it sounds like, again, if the baby is shal kayama, then we're good. Amar l'cha Reish Lakish, no. Hakikatari, this means to say, hakonis yivim tovenim seis meuberes. If a man does yibum with right, Shimon does yibum with Leah, with Rachel, and she's found to be pregnant, Hare Zulo Tinase Sarasa, Leah shouldn't remarry. Why? Shemalo Yeheya Vlad ben Kayama, because perhaps the baby will not be viable. Vechalitzas Meuberes Lo Shma Chalitza, Obias Meuberes Lo Shma Bia. And ultimately, again, the yibum or chalitza that was done is ineffective, and therefore, once the baby is determined to be non-viable, they need to repeat some type of process. Ve'im tomar halach achar rov noshim ve'rov noshim vlad ma'al yaldon. But why don't you say just go after the rov? In other words, we're both say it's interesting that we're going to make Leah wait, right? So Leah may have to wait. Now again, remember, Leah anyway has to wait how long? Has to wait how long before getting married? 3 months, right? But now you're going to make her go ahead and wait even longer. Halacha l'mais, in order to go ahead and see what happens with Rachel's baby. But why don't we say rov? We'll say, what's the rov? Rov women give birth to healthy children. Baruch Hashem, why don't we just employ that rov? So the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, Vlad in poter ad sheyetzi la'avir olam. Because we'll say, the idea over here is, in this case, by yibum, the offspring will only exempt once the baby comes into this world. So I would say, so it's interesting. Pregnancy by itself, that's why what's really fascinating about this is, what seems to come out according to everyone is, if it turns out that after Reuven died, Rachel is pregnant, interesting enough, l'chatchila, everyone says that what? What do we do in that case? You wait. Right? Remember again, this whole mess is coming up because you only found out that Rachel is pregnant after Shimon already did yibum. But what's interesting to note is, in a regular case, if Rachel's pregnant after the death of her husband, we say, wait, we don't know what's going to happen over here until that baby is born. If that baby is born and Baruch Hashem is healthy, obviously no yibum. If that baby is born and it's not viable, then once again we have a yibum situation. So the Gemara says again, the wrinkle in this case is we only found out that Rachel is pregnant when? After Shimon did yibum. So now again we're trying to figure out ex post facto, so what's the status of the yibum performed? But either way, when it comes to the co-wife, when it comes to Leah, we're going to tell her, sit tight, don't do anything right now, because let's see what the status of that baby is. I'm Rabbi Lazar. So Rabbi Lazar said, is it possible? Is it possible that halacha l'maisa we have this statement of Reish Lakish and we don't find it anywhere in the Mishnah? To which the Gemara says, Nafak dak va'ashkach. So Rabbi Lazar went out and he found the position of Reish Lakish found in the Mishnah. Rabbi says, interesting case. This nan ha'isha shalach baila b'tzaras l'medinas hayom. Suppose listen to this. Let's say a woman. So again, same case. Reuven is married to Rachel and Leah. So what happens? So Reuven goes overseas with Leah and Rachel stays behind. Okay, and then what happens? Uba va'amrullah meis ba'alech. And then what happens? So that then witnesses come back and they tell Rachel, Reuven died while he was overseas. He died while overseas. And again, I will say the case over here, of course, is they have no children. Right? So now Rachel gets edus that Reuven died. Now I will say, now what's the issue over here? So I'll say this is fascinating. We tell Rachel, don't do anything, right? You can't do anything until we find out if Leah is pregnant, right? Because remember again, we only have testimony, as far as we know, right? So Leah is fine. Leah is fine. She went overseas with Reuven. All we know is that Reuven died. We don't know anything about this. We're assuming Leah is still alive. So we tell Rachel, even though now we know that you know that your husband is dead, halacha l'maisi, you can't do anything. Again, in other words, are you subject to yibum, not subject to yibum? Well, we got to find out what Leah's status is. Is Leah pregnant? So the Gemara says, So bishlama yibume lo shemay hevlad ben kayama v'yifka be'isra eshesach. So I understand why we don't want Rachel to do yibum. Why can't we have Rachel do yibum? Because halacha l'maisa, if she does yibum and it turns out that Leah was pregnant and Leah gave birth to a viable baby, so if we and in the meantime, if Rachel did do yibum, we'll say it turns out that what? That's not yibum. What is it? Right? Eshesach. Right? She just had relations with her brother-in-law, which is problematic. Ella lo tachlotz amai. So listen to this. But why don't we just let her do chalitza? Listen to this. Bishlam tachlotz besochtes v'tinas besochtes halo hainu safek. So I understand if you don't want her to do chalitza within 9 months and get married within 9 months, that's still within the window of safek. Ella tachlotz besoch tisha v'tinas le'achar tisha. Rabbi say, why don't we just let Rachel do chalitza? Just do chalitza. See, Rabbi say, what's the beauty of chalitza? In general, what's the beauty of chalitza? The beauty of chalitza is what? Kind of like no harm done. No harm done. In other words, Rachel's sitting here. Here's what she knows. What does Rachel know? What does Rachel know? Her husband's dead. That's what she knows. What doesn't she know? Is Leah pregnant or not? So, okay, obviously we're just going to have to wait, right? We're going to have to wait for news, wait to find out. So I understand she can't do yibum, because again, if it turns out that Leah is pregnant, then halacha l'maisa she just committed an isra eshazah. But just let her do chalitza. She won't remarry now. In other words, she's going to wait to remarry, but just let her get the chalitza done now. In other words, both say, one could make the argument that chalitza is kind of like a get. Conventional wisdom with a get is get it done. Get it done. Husband's here, husband's available, get it done. Why? Because we will say, what happens if the husband is a flight risk? What happens is, so if you have Rachel waiting here to find that information, just let her do chalitza. She's not going to get remarried now. Let her do chalitza. I was about to say, let her get remarried after 9 months means she'll get remarried later, but at least get the chalitza done now. Uletamech tachlot v'tinasi la'achartes ela bar mina dahi da'abayi bar Abba v'Rav Chanina bar Abayi damri tarbayu shema yehe Vlad ben Kayama. Now I will say, okay, so as much as this is a good idea, sounds like a good idea, here's the problem. What do we consider? Rabbi, so this is the following situation. Let's play this out, okay? Step one, right? Reuven and Leah go on a trip overseas, right? Rachel stays behind, okay? Leaving aside the shalom bias dynamics and that, right? Rachel stays behind, okay? Step two, Rachel gets testimony, Reuven died, okay? Now, what's the problem? We don't know. Is Leah pregnant or not? So therefore, we'll say, what do we tell Rachel? Wait. So the Gemara suggests, why does she have to wait? Yibum, I understand, is not on the table. Because it turns out that Leah is pregnant and Rachel does yibum. It's not yibum, it's called arayas. Good. So therefore, but why not just do chalitza and wait? Just get the chalitza done, check the box, right? Get it done just in case, and get it done just in case. And I will say, because what's our logic with that? Worst case scenario, chalitza doesn't hurt Rachel. In other words, even if halacha l'maisa turns out that Leah is pregnant, fine, so she didn't need chalitza. But l'maisa, just get it done. So what's the Tushin says? It does hurt. I'll tell you why. Let's play this out. Let's say it turns out, Mazel Tov, Leah gives birth to a healthy baby. So we'll say, when Leah gives birth to a healthy baby, it turns out that what? What was the status of that chalitza that Rachel performed? Unnecessary. Then I will say, now watch this. So v'nimtza'ata matzricha kruz lekuna. So we'll say, now watch this. Chalitza does have an impact. What's the impact of chalitza? Chalitza precludes a woman from marrying a Kohen. So therefore, I will say, so watch this. When Rachel does chalitza, let's say during the 9 months that she's waiting to hear about Leah, so she does chalitza, the effect of that chalitza is what? She can't marry a Kohen. Now, what's going to happen? When Rachel gives birth, and it turns out that, when Leah gives birth, and it turns out that Rachel never needed chalitza, what do we have to do? We have to make an announcement, right? What's the announcement? Rachel is an almana, and she's not a chalutza. She's permitted to marry into the kahuna. Okay, so the Gemara says we have to make an announcement. The Gemara says, so fine, so make the announcement. What's the big deal? Just make the announcement. I understand. Just make the announcement. The Gemara says, "Dilma ika inish dahavi bechalitza v'lo havi b'achraza v'asi lemeimar kashari chalutza lekohen." Because they will say, "What are we concerned about? We're concerned about for confusion." They will say there are going to be people who are going to hear about. There are people who hear about the chalitza. But they don't stay till the end of shul for announcements, right? They're already making kiddush, right? So I will say, so what's going to happen? They're not going to hear the announcements. So what's going to happen? So when they don't hear the announcement and they see at some point in time later on Rachel marrying a Kohen, they assume that what is that? That's a chalutza marrying a Kohen. So therefore, Rabbi say, in order to avoid confusion, the halacha tells Rachel, sit tight. So I'll say, even though one can make the cogent argument to say, just let her get the chalitza done, it's just done. Lamaisa, we are concerned for the confusion that will cause. Incredible. Amrle Abaye, midi lo tachlos v'lo tisyabim katani. Does the Mishnah say that she can't do chalitza or do yibum? Lo tinaseh v'lo tisyabim katani, below chalitza. So it says ultimately again, she shouldn't go ahead and get married to someone else or do yibum. But actually, it doesn't say chalitza. Aval icholitzla hachan nami desharia. So Abaye says actually the truth is, although we ideally don't want her to do anything, if halacha lemaisa, she did do chalitza, it would work. It would work. Tanya kavase de Reish Lakish. I will say we have a right that supports Reish Lakish. Hacholitz lemeuberes ve'pila. So we'll say if a person did chalitz, back to our regular case, right? Reuven passes away, leaves behind two wives, Rachel and Leah. Shimon does chalitza with Rachel, but it turns out that Rachel is pregnant, and subsequently Rachel miscarries. Tzricha chalitza min ha'achin. Ultimately, she requires another chalitza. Why? Because any yibum or chalitza done with a pregnant yevama is inconsequential. It's halachically insignificant. Amar Rava says, Hilchasa kavase de Reish Lakish bahani tlas. So Rav said, the halacha follows Reish Lakish in these three cases. Case number one, Chada Amran. Rabbi says the case that we just mentioned. So Rabbi said the Gemara is suggesting that the halacha follows Reish Lakish, which is that any time you do chalitza or yibum with a pregnant yevama, that chalitza or yibum is irrelevant. And I will say that is indeed how the Rambam paskins in Hilchos Yibum bar Chalitza, Perek Aleph, Halacha Chaf. Listen to this. The Rambam writes, Hacholitz liyevimto v'nimtzum uberes v'yolda. If a person does chalitza with his yevama, and it turns out that she's pregnant, and she has a baby, so the Rambam writes over here, if the baby is viable, then it turns out that ultimately chalitza was never done, and therefore she's a widow, and she is muteres to the Kohen. But halacha l'maisa, if she went ahead and she miscarried, the halacha is you have to do chalitza again. You have to do chalitza again. There also the Rambam says the ficha so acholitz levimta moberes lo tinasi so for the Rambam paskins like Reish Lakish. This is very important. Rambam paskins like Reish Lakish that chalitza or yibum done during pregnancy is halachically irrelevant. And therefore, again, if she has, we'll say now this cuts both ways. If she has a baby and the baby is viable, then what's her status? What's the yivama status? She's a widow. She is not a chalutza. Therefore, what? She's permitted to marry a Kohen. Conversely, if she miscarries, now once again she is subject to yibam chalitza. The initial chalitza that was done is halachically irrelevant, and halacha l'maisa again, one of the brothers, it could be the same brother, but one of the brothers has to repeat the process of either yibam or chalitza. Therefore, the Rambam also says that halacha l'maisa in the second case, which is where there's two wives, Reuven passes away, Rachel and Leah, both wives fall to Shimon. If Shimon does chalitza, let's say with Rachel, and it turns out that she's pregnant, we tell the co-wife Leah to sit tight until Rachel ultimately gives birth, and then based on what happens with the baby, that will determine Leah's status as well. Beautiful. We'll say that's that's number one. So now we'll say we're transitioning a little bit over here. So now comes along Rava, and Rava says that halacha follows Reish Lakish in three cases. Case number one is chalitza meuberes. Chalitza meuberes or yibum meuberes. Loshma yibum, loshma chalitza. That's case one. What's case two? So the Gemara says, idach disnan hamechalik nechasav al piv. But this is a very interesting case. We'll say this is a Yerusha case. Let's say a man has three sons, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven is the Bechar, firstborn. So we'll say, what's the halacha by Bechar? What's the halacha by Bechar? Pishnayim. Right? So the firstborn son gets a double portion. In this case, the father, we'll call him Yaakov, is doing something very interesting. He's dividing up his estate while he's still alive. Right? So, hamechalik nechasav al piv. So, Yaakov is going ahead. Rashi says over here, 4 lines from the bottom, achrei divrei piv, v'lo b'stam Yerusha b'shtiga. See, I will say, if, let's say Yaakov never does any estate planning, and he dies. Shabbos say the Torah essentially divides up his estate, right? The Torah says that what the Bechar gets a double portion, right? And everyone else shares equally in the estate, and every part of the estate is divided up equally amongst the 3 sons. In this case, Reuven is actively giving away his property to his sons while he is still alive. Now watch this. Riba la'echad u'miyet la'echad v'hishva lachem es habachar dvarav kayamin. Shabbos say, if when gifting away his estate, he makes all of his sons equal, then ultimately it works. It works. Shabbos say, take a look at Rashi. Riba la'echad u'miyet la'echad osha. Listen to this. Delakula nasa mechayev ve'in kan yerusha lita b'chara v'la pshutin lita b'shava ela kama shiva. So I'll say, what's happening over here? Yaakov is gifting his estate. I will say, when you gift your estate, or when you gift away your property when you're alive, you can gift it how? However you want. We'll say, by the way, this is actually very important, because again, it's very important. We'll say in general, having a will, having life insurance is very important. Having a will is very important. And just understand, if you're going to have a will, it is very important to utilize an estate attorney who knows halacha, because again, you do not want to do estate planning that runs contrary to halacha, especially if you have a halachic bachar. So there are mechanisms that one could use. But let's say again, I have children. I want all of my children to share in my estate equally. Again, you have to go to an estate attorney who understands this. I don't want to plug anyone specifically. But there's someone whose name rhymes with Yaakov Rappaport who's very good at this, right? So again, halacha, you have to go to someone who understands this, and there are ways that one could do this. Because halacha l'maisa, for example, there are mechanisms that you could use to essentially trigger a pre-death gift. You could create a retroactive gift that's chal one moment before you die. So when you gift away your property, halacha l'maisa, before you die, you can gift it away however you want. Right? That you can do however. So you have a bachar, you want all of your kids to get equal. You want girls, you want your daughters to inherit with your sons. Because remember, also in halacha, girls don't inherit. Right? Boys inherit, but I want my daughters to inherit my property as well. Again, if I leave a will that says my daughters inherit, so then ultimately, again in halacha, that will is batal. Because that's masna amasha kasav batorah. If you make a t'nai that runs contrary to Torah law, we're going to see this in just a moment, the t'nai is batal. But again, if I create a pre-death gift, then halacha l'maisa, I could do whatever I want. Let's say, it's so important. We like to think that estate planning is only for people who are older. But l'maisa, especially once a person has children, it's a must. It doesn't matter how young you are. We never know what life holds in store, and we have an achrayus to those who we love to make sure that they are properly taken care of in the event that something happens to us. So therefore, again, on that note, good. So the Gemara says as follows. So again, if there's one tonight in the Daf Chazara today, it's going to be life insurance and a halachic will. Now, when I say halachic will, I don't mean the halachic advance directive. That's okay. Let's get into it. Right? That's important also, right? You have to put forward how are your end of life decisions being made. Don't leave these things to just your family to figure out. Be explicit. There are wonderful documents like this. Rabbinical Council of America has the best healthcare proxy. It's simple. It just simply says, I'm an Orthodox Jew. I want my end-of-life decisions made in conformance with halacha. Here are the rabbis that I want consulted in the event that there are halachic decisions to be made. And gamarnu. You file it, you put it with your will, with your estate information, give a copy to your family, and again, you save them so much agmas nefesh. Create a will, an estate planning with a halachic will, save so much agmas nefesh. Life insurance hopefully save so much agmas, or at least diminish a little bit of agmas nefesh. Okay, good. So Gemara says as follows. So therefore, a person goes ahead and divides up his estate amongst his children, gives it as a gift while he's still alive. So halacha l'maisa, it works. Even though, again, you're giving all the kids equal shares. It works. Vim amar mishum yerusha, lo amar klum. But I will say, listen to this. However, if you said like this, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, I want you all to inherit my estate equally, so that statement doesn't work. Now, I will say, why doesn't that statement work? Because once again, Rashi says, Shehisna amasha kasav batorah utna batal. See, I will say, when does it work? When does it work to give your property to your children equally? When you're framing it as what? A gift. But the moment you say, I want you all to inherit equally, that does not work. Now, I will say, when we say it does not work, it means someone could take that will, right, challenge it in a Beis Din, and the will be deemed invalid. It will be deemed invalid. Because halacha l'maisa, if you make a will that runs contrary to biblical law, which is what you're doing when you say you want all of your children to inherit equally, masna ma shekasav b'Torah, tina'o batel. Right, the tinai is batel. To which the Gemara says, listen to this. Lo amar so kasa bein mitchila bein besof bein be'emtza mishum matana tevarav kayamin. Now we'll say halacha l'maisa. If you went ahead and somewhere in that document, now let's say you're drafting a document, somewhere in that document you put in the word matana. As long as you put in the word matana somewhere in the beginning, the end, in the middle, you're good to go. Otherwise, once you have matana in there, then it's clear that this arrangement is not operating als Yerusha, but it's operating als matana. That's fine. Here we go. Reish Lakish says, "Li'olam lo kana ad shiomar ploni uploni yirshu sadeh plonis uplonis shenasatim lahem b'matana birashum." Reish Lakish says that halacha l'maisa no. The word siyabosai, according to the first opinion, as long as the word matana appears somewhere in there. In other words, let's say you say, I want to give Ruvain, field A b'matana, and I want to give Shimon field B. But I say, let's say Yerusha, don't say matana. And I say, right, Levi, Yerusha, not matana. First opinion says, as long as you have the word matana in there somewhere, you're fine. Reish Lakish says, no. Matana has to be mentioned by every single one of the children, or every single one of the inheritors. Rashi says, "Li'olam lo kana lo amas nisin palik ela hasam yishnochlim pligi amorei b'diyukid demas nisin dechi asar rabin amar yoresh ploni sada ploni betinasin sada ploni leploni Rabbi Yochanan kana afilu hayd Yerusha demidat kala shomatana b'hay amshulin yashi hay shtar tzava lechem minay kulanay mataninu." So we'll say, Rabbi Yochanan says like this. As long as you mention, this is so exciting, as long as you mention matana by one of the sons, that's enough. Why? Because it's understood. Once you mention matana once, so say, we understand, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're effectively creating a matana for all of them. Right? That's what's happening over here. Reish Lakish says, no. Li'olam lo kana dahud Yerusha damina lahai havi matana lahai Yerusha ad shiyomar. No, Reish Lakish says, you have to say matana by each of the kids. Got to say matana. Now I will say, what is interesting over here is you could actually mention Yerusha as well. Isn't that interesting? You could say the word inherit, because we understand in this context, inherit really means much more what? What does it really mean? Acquire. But you have to have the word matana in there. Incredible, Rabbi say. So listen to this. So therefore, Rabbi, he's very excited. We'll say, feels good like that. I love you. I happen to love Yevamos, but you can't lie. It feels nice to step out of Yevamos just for a few minutes, right? Or I guess I did it for 12 minutes already, right? So I would never finish it down. I'll say, so again, halacha l'maisa. But again, I didn't mean it like that. I mean, Yevamos is wonderful, right? But just sometimes, it's nice to get a taste of a little something else. So Rabbi says, it's like a side dish. It's nice. The main is incredible. Yevamos is fantastic, but a nice side. So it says, Amar Rava. So Rava, remember again, Rava saying that Allah follows Reish Lakish in these three cases. Case number one is that chalitza or yibum with a me'uberes doesn't work. Case number two is that if you want to gift away your property during your lifetime to your children and get everyone to share equally, you could do that. But you must use the lashon of matana by which kids? Every single kid. Incredible. So it says the Gemara v'idach disnan. We'll say another case. Hakoseid kol mechasav libno la'achar moso. This is actually an interesting case. We'll say, let's say I go ahead and I write that my son will inherit in all of my property after I die. Now we'll say, look at Rashi. La'achar moso shekasav me'ayom ula'achar misa ve'ein la'av bohem ela achilas peros bechayev. So we'll say, what I'm doing over here is as follows. I write a document. I have a property, and I write a document to my son. I hereby go ahead and bequeath this property to you, mehayom, from today and after my death. In this, without getting into all the technicalities over here, but in a situation like this, essentially what I'm doing is I'm giving away title, but retaining usage, or in halacha what we call peros. So from that point, essentially, my son has title, but I get to use the property, and I retain the rights to the peros. This is interesting. So now here's the case. Literally again, I'm writing a document that says, Mehayom ula'achar misasi. From today and after my death, I hereby give you this property. So the effect of that is, my son has title, I have peros, I have usage. Now what that effectively means is what? So say, listen to this. Can I sell the property? Not really. Not really. No. Why? Because Lamaisa, I don't have title. I have usage, but I don't have title. But my son can't sell it either. Why? Because, interestingly enough, he has title, but he doesn't have usage. So essentially, interestingly enough, during the period of time between the time that I write this document and die, so Lamaisa, again, no one really has the right to sell. Now, how can it be sold? Right? If they both agree. Right? So again, there is a case in which you can sell it, but father and son would need to agree to the transaction. Watch this. Macharav. Let's say I go ahead and I sell it anyway. I sell the property anyway. Macharav. So mechurin ad sheyamoshu. Ultimately, again, if I sell it, so we'll say, this is interesting. If I sell it, what am I essentially selling? What am I selling? Peros. Rashi says, Macharav mechur right across from Rashi. Lecha lokeach peros kol yimei ha'av shezaka b'zchus she'elo lezeh aben. So we'll say, so ultimately, again, if I end up selling it, what I'm really selling are my rights. So technically speaking, I could sell my rights to Peros, but I will say there's an expiration date on that purchase. What's the expiration date? My death. Right? Because the moment that I die, then the entire field goes to my son. So Machar Ha'av Mechurin Ad Sheyamosu. Machar Haben, what happens if the son sells it? I will say, what if my son sells the property during my lifetime? Ein Lokeach Klum Ad Sheyamos Ha'av. In that case, I will say, if my son sells it, essentially what my son is selling is a right to the property after I die. Because Lamaisa, when I'm alive, the sale doesn't really have any kind of consequences. Now watch this case. So it says the Gemara, so God said, good. So if I sell, I'm selling Peros. If my son sells, there's nothing really that's happening. He could sell. Essentially what he's saying is his future right to inherit this property. He could do that. Watch this. Vitmar. Oh, we'll say, what happens? Listen to this case. What happens if the son sells the property, but then the son predeceases his father? What happens in this case? So we'll say, ultimately, again, Rabbi Yochanan says that when the father subsequently dies, the purchaser does not acquire the property. Reish Lakish says, no, when the father dies, the purchaser acquires the property. So we'll say, so in this case, again, remember, so what's happened? Son, so same thing, father writes to the son, this is your property, again, from today until I die. Son, or from when I die. So father has peros, son has title. Son goes ahead and sells the property during lifetime of the father, but then son predeceases father. So the sheileimah is now, upon the death of the father, does the property go to the purchaser? Rabbi Yochanan says no. Reish Lakish says yes. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lo Kana Lokeach Kinyan Peres Kinyan Aguf. Rabbi Yochanan essentially says like this: the moment that the son predeceases the father essentially becomes the sole owner of the field. Why? Because Kinyan Peres is Kinyan Aguf. He already had usage, and usage is already like quasi ownership. The death of the son cements his ownership, and therefore, again, the sale that the son made to the purchaser is effectively void. Reish Lakish says, Reish Lakish says, upon the death of the father, ultimately the purchaser does acquire. Why? Kinyan Peros, Lav Kinyan Haguf Tami. Peros is not like ownership. So even though the father had usage is not ownership, and therefore again, the father retains the right to use the field all the days of his life. But Lamaisa, once the father dies, that triggers the sale that the now deceased son made, and Halacha Lamaisa, upon the death of the father, the field becomes the property of the purchaser. And I will say, that is indeed how we paskin. Right? That is indeed how we paskin. That Halacha Lamaisa, in this type of situation where the son sold the field during the lifetime of the father, and now ultimately again, the son predeceases the father. When the father dies, the property becomes the property comes under the ownership of the purchaser. So therefore I will say, we have three cases in which we pass like Reish Lakish. Case number one, chalitza or yibum with uberes, with a pregnant yivama, is ineffective. Case number two, you could gift away your property to your children during your lifetime, however you want. Thereby, essentially, what are you doing? We'll say, when you do a lifetime gift, what are you effectively doing? You're circumventing biblical inheritance law, which is totally fine. That's not a problem. You could do that. You could absolutely do that. But again, you must include lashon of what? Matana. By who? Each and every kid. And case number 3, halacha l'maisa, we pass like Reish Lakish, kinyan peros lavka kinyan aguf. Right to usage is not like complete ownership, and therefore in this case, where the son went ahead and sold the property, sold his right, essentially sold the title to the property, that only becomes fully actualized after the death of the father. And then what happens? The son predeceases the father. Upon the death of the father, the purchaser acquires the property. Beautiful. Let's go right to Rabbi say. Ein avlat shal kayama. So we'll say, remember again, the Tana Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, Amru Yotzi beget. So we'll say, so remember again, in this case, what did we say? Ein avlat shal kayama. So we'll say, in this case over here, remember, this was a situation where a person did chalitza with his Yevamos, right? So Shimon did chalitza with Rachel, with his sister-in-law, and it turns out that she's pregnant. Right? So remember again, what did we say? Ein havlat shal kayama. If ultimately, again, if it turns out that the baby is not viable, right? Ein havlat shal kayama. Yikayim. I'm sorry, boss. This is actually the end case. This is the end case. No. I'm sorry. If it turns out that the baby was not viable, ultimately, again, the Mishnah said, "Hu asar b'krovosel, v'hi asar b'krovav." Good. She's prohibited to his relatives. He's prohibited to her relatives. So it says the Gemara. Good. Tanam B'Shar Elazar Yotzi beget. We will say halacha l'maisa. He has to give her a get. Amar Rava, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Elazar, Amru Davar Echad, Rabbi Eliezer Hada Amran, Rabbi Meir decided, here we go. Lo Yisa Adam Uberes Chaver Nabosai. So this would be talking about a situation where halacha l'maisa. Sorry, let me clarify. Shimon, the surviving brother, did yibum with Rachel, the widow. Right? It turns out that she's pregnant. Now Rabbi say, what happens? So halacha l'maisa. The vlad is shut, right? The baby does not survive. So Rabbi says, now we've already established that halacha l'maisa, the yibum is not a good yibum. In addition to that, Rabbi Eliezer says he has to give her a get. Okay, we'll discuss the mechanics of that as well. So the Gemara says, well, it comes along Rabbah, and Rabbah says, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Eliezer both said one thing. Rabbi Eliezer had the Amran, Rabbi Meir both said, listen to this case. Tisanya, lo yisa adam u'bares chaver menekes chavero. A person cannot marry mu'bares chaver menekes chavero. So the halacha is that if a woman is pregnant, and let's say her husband dies, another man cannot marry her during her pregnancy. Similarly again, if a woman is widowed, but she's still nursing her child from her first marriage, you cannot marry these women. Rabbi say, what's the problem with marrying mu'bares chavero or meinekes chavero? It's a concern ultimately again for the pregnancy or for the nursing baby. What we're concerned about is that if a man marries a woman who's pregnant, let's say again she becomes pregnant again. Now I will say again, the physiological possibility of that is, again, a person could have an ectopic pregnancy. There are things that do happen. We're concerned that the pregnancy is not going to be properly taken care of. Or halacha l'maisa, if a nursing woman becomes pregnant, her milk supply is diminished, thereby putting her baby at a disadvantage. Therefore, Chazal said, do not marry a woman who is pregnant from another man, or ultimately nursing another man's child. Vim nasa, and if you did marry, yotzi v'lo yachzir olamas divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says you have to divorce her, and you are never permitted to remarry her. The Chum say yotzi, you have to divorce her. Uchel she'agia zmano lichnos yichnos. You have to divorce her now, but what? After the prohibited window, you are permitted to go out and remarry her. So Rabbi says, so therefore again the Gemara is suggesting, Rabbi Eliezer says the same idea, that halacha l'maisa, you have to give a get to this particular woman in question as well. We'll stop over here for today. Sorry, we went through this last piece quickly. We'll pick up with this sugya tomorrow, meinekes chavero, mu'beres chavero, as well as the obligation to give a get in this case of mistaken yibum. Shkach Rabbi.